Jessica Hart over at the Live Desk. Homeland Security shared a new video today that shows a different angle leading up to the ICE shooting that killed 37-year-old Renee Good.
The Fox News alert did not arrive with context. It arrived with a clip. Grainy body camera footage from an ICE agent in Minneapolis, released into a country already on edge. A vehicle, a confrontation measured in seconds, a single gunshot, a 37-year-old woman dead at the scene. Almost immediately, the narrative split in two. Outrage on one side, justification on the other. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Paused, replayed, scrutinized frame by frame. On social media, conclusions formed faster than facts. In less than 6 hours, the clip generated over 18 million views, triggering protests in multiple districts and forcing local officials into emergency briefings. Headlines compressed a complex encounter into a single accusation before investigators had finished their first report. Then came the political response. Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the newly released footage directly on X. Many of you have been told this law enforcement officer wasn't hit by a car, wasn't being harassed, and murdered an innocent woman. The reality is that his life was endangered, and he fired in self-defense. Federal authorities reinforced that position. Early assessments cited perceived lethal threat indicators and adherence to use of force protocols. Within 24 hours, 3 separate federal reviews reached the same preliminary conclusion. But the city did not calm, because the gunshot did not exist in isolation. Minneapolis was already under strain. Internal enforcement data later referenced showed that over 1,300 high-risk subjects, including violent offenders and repeat felony suspects, had been released back into the community across the metro area over a 4-year period. Nearly 42% of those individuals were linked to unresolved warrants or active investigations. The shooting became a spark, not a conclusion. Behind the scenes, federal supervisors did not close files. They opened new ones. The incident triggered a broader reassessment of why that enforcement action had been taking place, and what else might be operating nearby. Within 12 hours, analysts began cross-checking vehicle movements, phone pings, and prior enforcement failures. A pattern emerged near a major interstate corridor, one tied to dozens of stalled cases dating back years. By nightfall, the focus had shifted. That single shot did not end the operation. It quietly unlocked something far larger, something that had been protected by routine, overlooked by design, and left untouched far longer than anyone realized. At 3:12 a.m., South Minneapolis was silent. Unmarked federal vehicles cut their engines a block away, rolling into position around a 14-story hotel near the interstate. On paper, it was unremarkable. Short stays, constant turnover, nothing that demanded attention. In reality, it sat directly inside a corridor analysts had flagged only hours earlier. The operation began without sirens. Exits were sealed first. Elevators froze between floors. Stairwells vanished under teams moving fast and low. Doors came open in controlled bursts. Flashlights carved through dark hallways as commands echoed. Occupants were ordered down, hands visible, rooms cleared one by one. The movement never slowed, floor by floor, no blind spots. In under 40 minutes, agents detained approximately 215 individuals, many carrying temporary or unverifiable identities. Bags were opened, stories collapsed. Investigators recovered over 120 forged passports, dozens of prepaid phones, and cash hidden behind ceiling panels and inside maintenance shafts. By the time the final room was secured, seized currency had climbed past $3.6 million. Then, the tone changed. Search teams opened reinforced luggage and locked service rooms. Inside were more than 30 firearms, several already loaded, alongside narcotics packaged for distribution. This was not residue. It was supply. In that moment, the operation crossed a line. What had been framed as an immigration action revealed something far heavier. This building was not sheltering people. It was supporting a system. If you believe this hotel raid exposed more than paperwork violations, keep watching. As dawn approached, seized phones began vibrating again. Encrypted messages stalled mid-thread. Delivery routes waited for confirmations that never came. Somewhere beyond the hotel walls, unseen pieces of the structure reacted, adjusting to a silence they did not expect. The night was over. The real story was just beginning. By dawn, the hotel was no longer the center of gravity. The data was. Phones seized from the rooms never stopped vibrating. Missed calls stacked by the hundreds. Encrypted threads froze mid-command. Delivery windows sat open with no confirmations. Analysts fed numbers into live maps, linking burner devices to vehicles, addresses, and names that had surfaced before. Always briefly. Always without enough weight to hold. This time, the structure held. What first looked like scattered activity aligned into a single system. Routes overlapped, money flowed in predictable arcs, identities recycled with precision. At the center, two profiles refused to fade into the background. Khalif Nurelmi, 45, a Somali-born judge with a spotless public record. Hoden El Nur, 42, a licensed attorney practicing immigration and criminal law in Minneapolis. On paper, they were insulated. In the data, they were everywhere. Financial transfers moved through accounts that should never have intersected. Phone metadata placed trusted intermediaries exactly where shipments paused or rerouted. Investigators estimated the network had been active for 8 to 9 years, cycling personnel every 14 to 18 months to avoid exposure. Nearly 70% of operational roles were filled by individuals who had entered the country within the last 5 years, many carrying fabricated identities tied back to the same document mills. Protection explained the longevity. Court access delayed warrants. Legal filing stalled actions just long enough for routes to shift. Quiet payments moved through layers designed to look administrative. The system did not fight enforcement, it stepped around it. Then movement appeared. At 8:21 a.m., cameras at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport flagged two arrivals entering separate terminals minutes apart. Minimal luggage, newly issued passports, one-way international tickets, no public statements, no attorneys present. Two agents watching the feeds, the signal was unmistakable. At 8:27 a.m., before boarding began, teams converged. The arrest unfolded without spectacle. Controlled, precise, finished in seconds. No resistance, no explanations, just the sound of restraints closing in the middle of the departure hall. With that moment, the network lost its shield. Within hours, expanded warrants were authorized. Financial barriers fell. Names buried for years surfaced at once. What had started as a localized operation now revealed itself as a national conspiracy, one that had already begun to unravel from the inside. The warrants went live at 4 a.m., not in one city, not in one state. Across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Michigan, synchronized clocks reached zero at the same moment. More than 1,100 federal agents moved into position, their routes planned down to the minute. Command centers lit up with live feeds as ICE, FBI, DEA, and DHS units advanced as a single system. The first breach hit northern Minnesota. A reinforced door gave way under controlled force. Lookouts attempted to scatter, but resistance collapsed almost immediately. Inside, rooms designed to look empty were anything but. Hidden compartments opened to reveal stacked narcotics, sealed and labeled for transport. Early counts suggested over 1.6 tons of product staged across multiple sites before dawn. By 4:18 a.m., teams on the outskirts of Milwaukee encountered a converted auto shop fortified beyond zoning records. Elevated positions were cleared, weapons were secured. Inside the structure, pallets of drugs rose nearly to shoulder height. Vacuum-packed fentanyl and cocaine, bundled by the kilogram, waited beside freshly printed manifests. Analysts later estimated the location alone could supply 4 Midwestern cities for weeks. Minutes later, South Chicago came online. Simultaneous entry struck an apartment complex across 3 floors. Suspects attempted to flee through stairwells and rooftops. Buildings were secured methodically. Firearms and cash were pulled from walls, vents, and false flooring. Across the region, agents reported early warning systems, barricades, and weapons staged for immediate use. By sunrise, the scope was undeniable. Across over 70 locations, federal teams encountered infrastructure built for defense, not evasion. Within the first 36 hours, 4 separate armed confrontations erupted. Several suspects were wounded while resisting arrest. 2 federal agents sustained injuries and were evacuated, both expected to recover. Arrests mounted rapidly. By the end of the first day, nearly 400 suspects were in custody. By day 2, that number climbed past 630, including more than 250 individuals directly tied to interstate transport and armed enforcement roles. Seizures followed the arrests. Convoys rolled out carrying tons of narcotics, millions in cash, and arsenals large enough to supply a small militia. This was not a sweep. It was the exposure of a system that had prepared for violence and been met with something it could not outmaneuver. As the raid settled, investigators turned backward. What emerged was not a sudden operation, but a timeline stretching nearly a decade. Financial records, encrypted ledgers, and witness statements aligned into a single arc. What began as limited smuggling had matured into an industrial pipeline. Shipments moved north in controlled waves, concealed inside commercial traffic, then redistributed outward from Minneapolis with mechanical precision. Analysts estimated the network had pushed tens of tons of narcotics through the region over 8 to 9 years, not all at once, never enough to trigger alarms, each load broken down, diluted into routine, cocaine for speed and cash flow, methamphetamine for control, fentanyl for volume, and devastation. The human impact followed the data. Emergency room reports showed overdose admissions in key Minnesota counties had risen by more than 280% over 5 years. In several neighborhoods, fentanyl-related fatalities doubled in under 36 months. Violent crime tracked the same curve. Armed robberies increased. Turf disputes hardened. What once looked like isolated incidents now formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Witnesses described how newly arrived migrants were absorbed quickly. Some drove shipments, others guarded storage sites. Many were trapped by fabricated debts that grew faster than wages could repay. Leaving was not an option. Silence was enforced through pressure applied far from U.S. borders. The system adapted constantly. Routes rotated every few weeks. Vehicles were discarded after limited use. Communication shifted before patterns could form. Each adjustment bought time, until it didn't. By the time the hotel raid exposed the core, the damage had already spread far beyond any single city. The violence was not random. The losses were not accidental. They were the predictable outcome of a machine built to run quietly, efficiently, and without pause. Once the arrest stabilized, the investigation shifted direction. Agents began comparing testimony against financial logs and phone records recovered during the raids. Patterns that had once looked coincidental hardened into proof. Names repeated, payments aligned to dates when inspections failed, traffic stops dissolved, or paperwork vanished without explanation. What investigators had feared quietly during the operation was now unavoidable. The network had not survived on secrecy alone. Over the next 72 hours, internal affairs units moved in parallel with federal prosecutors. Subpoenas were issued without announcement. Lockers were opened. Home safes were searched. By the end of the week, between 9 and 13 local officers were taken into custody on charges ranging from bribery to obstruction. Several admitted to ignoring stops in exchange for cash. Others provided advance notice of enforcement activity. Then, a higher profile surfaced. Investigators documented evidence tying a senior police administrator to repeated payments routed through shell accounts. Manpower had been redirected away from key corridors. Complaints had been buried under clerical labels. Emails recovered from archived servers showed deliberate interference masked as routine procedure. The damage spread quickly. Entire units were placed under federal oversight. Pending cases tied to compromised personnel were flagged for review. Careers built over decades collapsed in days. Public trust followed them down. Protests returned, not aimed at enforcement alone, but at the realization that protection had been purchased from inside the system itself. For agents who had faced armed resistance only days earlier, this phase carried a heavier weight. It was easier to confront traffickers than to accept how deeply the shield had been embedded. But once it cracked, it did not hold. Without internal protection, routes closed, payments stopped. The structure that had taken years to build began to fail, quietly and all at once. With the internal barrier removed, the collapse accelerated. Federal prosecutors filed hundreds of indictments within days, spanning narcotics trafficking, weapons violations, human smuggling, money laundering, and corruption. Assets were frozen almost immediately. Properties changed hands overnight. Accounts holding tens of millions of dollars were locked before transfers could clear. The impact reached the street quickly. Within 30 days, overdose admissions at major Minnesota hospitals dropped by nearly 35%. Street-level seizures declined not because enforcement slowed, but because supply chains had fractured. Dealers disappeared or turned on one another. Without protection, survival became uncertain. The system did not heal overnight. Too much damage had already been done. But something fundamental shifted. The illusion of immunity vanished. What remained was accountability, slow, methodical, and impossible to ignore.